It is. We're back. We're gonna be on time for once, the last second. It's impossible. So, I was gonna say you could always use your phone, maybe, with the Hangouts app or something. That's a thought. Oh, I see. Okay. Just a second, people. I can hear her. Hopefully, you can in a minute. Um,
Properties.
oh, I see what's going on.
Test. Test. Can you hear me now? Guys?
Yeah.
The Empress has arrived.
Can you still hear me, Yusuf?
I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay.
I have no idea if I'm loud or silent or I'm afraid. I'm afraid I'm like super loud.
I can hear you, but on delay, like as if you were watching us.
Okay.
Like I'll hear that, but then I'll hear you as well.
Do you have the Hangout on?
Yay!
I'm louder than him.
There's
Okay.
2 U's.
There's 2 U's. Lovely. How does that work? I cannot even see where you see the second me. So you gotta. Yeah. 2 U's that are better than 1. Lovely. Okay. You know, I'll just stay a bit further away from the microphone. That should do the trick. So right now. Yeah. Okay, so now we actually wanted to talk about something today. We didn't just want to have technical difficulties as usual. Yay! Okay. So, the clean your room, but don't forget your brain. That actually comes from Jordan Peterson. Where he said, you know, clear your room because that will, you know, help you to keep order in your life, in a sense. And I kind of found it, you know, a neat thing to add the brain to it. Because, you know, you can have a clean room as much as you want. You still have to make sure that what you think is actually, you know, properly cleared out and thought through. So we wanted to talk about several things. I think the main thing that drove us, or like at least drove me, to talk about a couple of ideas shared from Peterson was that we both saw the Hangout with Sam Harris, and then I made a video just recently about Jordan Peterson, and I got quite interesting feedback. And so I got quite an interesting insight into how people think, which is absolutely amazing. So, do you hear this beep? Where is this coming from?
I gotcha.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I know what the problem is. Lana, stop typing to me while we are in a hangout. I know you're there. I know you see this. You don't have to privately chat to me. You're making everything beep around me. Gee.
Sorry.
Yeah. Okay. So, what should we start with? I made you do homework, so you are allowed to start.
Let's do definitions. That's really important.
Maybe let's start.
Talking about messy rooms.
Yeah, messy rooms. No, like the funny thing is, and that is something that I've noticed a lot with Logic than me, because Logic is this kind of person who really likes everything settled and orderly and squared and you know, he would be the kind of person who would, you know, like hang one cable for every hook all over the walls and then like duct tape what kind of cable belongs where. He's that kind of orderly person. And I, on the other hand, you know, if there is no chaos, I just don't feel that good. So, yeah. No, and funny thing is, like, when I have to do something, because I admit, I have a very chaotic mind. I make everything messy. And if it's not messy, I kind of can't work. But when I order my room, when I put order into my room, I can't find anything anymore. As long as it's messy, I know where to find it. But the moment I start making order and like put stuff neatly into places and boxes and squares, it's over. I don't know anything anymore. And it's a bit the same with like organizing. Like if I have a plan and I have to stick to the plan, I just don't get anything done. I have to have it messy. And some people apparently don't have that. Apparently some people just really like it orderly, you know, one step after another, which is cool. Just I can't follow it too much. How about you?
Yeah, I was just thinking about how I used to be that way. Like growing up, I was like that, like in my room, for example. I'm really good at picking out patterns. That's why I do a lot of theoretical work.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, that's kind of how I remember it. So, like, for example, I can usually remember where something's at on a page in a book.
Okay.
So, like, I may not be able to tell you the page number, but if you're on the page, I can point to it immediately. Things like that. So, like, if let's say I couldn't find my wallet, I would remember where it was, like, in relation to the other things in the room.
I see.
The problem with that is like, if someone rearranges something in the room enough, including myself, it's not going to work too well. But I'm wondering how different that is from now, where now I'm like super orderly. Like I swung the complete opposite direction when I got to work. And now I know where everything in my entire place is. Like I can tell you where every single thing is.
Yeah, but I
So
guess
I'm
if
not
you
sure
have
if
like a
all that
fixed
different.
place, sorry. If you have a fixed place, then probably you always put it back in that fixed place, right?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Is like, so maybe I just shifted from like being in relation to other movable objects to relation with non-movable objects.
Yeah.
So like, I have a dish that I throw everything in out of my pockets when I walk in the door, something like that. So it's like that dish isn't going anywhere, so I know I can go there. Or like, you know, obvious things like a particular shelf that's like mounted on the wall, something like that. So maybe I just kind of extrapolated the relationship more to like parts of the room, so I can rely on something like that. Because like if you came in my room when I was younger and say like completely rearranged it, I'd be SOL. I wouldn't be able to find anything.
Yeah.
That would be a mess.
Yeah. No, I remember things by the timeline, basically.
Okay.
Like, when I came in, where did I put down my phone? So basically, I don't go like, yeah, I have the phone here, I have the phone there, for example. I like start off from the last time I saw the phone, and then I just go timeline-wise. And because the thing is, the moment I have like a fixed place, and it's very hard for certain things to put them in a fixed place for me, because, you know, I'm constantly around dealing with stuff and I get interrupted. And the moment I get interrupted, I forget what I'm doing. And then I go back and then I, you know, restart again, basically. So if I have a fixed place and I'm supposed to find the stuff in a fixed place. It just will never quite work out that well, because by the time I managed to get the stuff to the fixed place, it was already in 5 different places.
I can do it well with other people's stuff too. Like not if it's at their place, but like if we're out somewhere in public together,
Mm-hmm.
or they're at my place and they can't find something in theirs. No, I'm wondering. So like I have this sort of strange personal record that I'm kind of proud of. I'm for whatever reason I'm like hyper aware of everything around me all the time, like what's going on. So and it's actually a side effect of a sort of biological trait I deal with. So I'm really good at things like driving. Like I can like not just realize everything around me, but I can pick out the pattern of where things are tending to go. So like I'll never get boxed in, for example, on the highway by like trucks
Okay.
or something like that. I always see everything coming.
Okay.
But my record is the thing I'm proud of is I've never had a drink spilled on me in a public restaurant because
Okay.
I always see it coming and I jump out of the way as soon as it goes down.
Lucky
And it
you.
completely misses me.
Or maybe you just have very good waitresses. So no, just quick question in the chat, guys. Who of you has an orderly home and who of you has a messy home? Write orderly if it's orderly and write messy if it's messy. I'm seriously curious. That will be a lot of messy. I predict there will be a lot of messy. Okay, so yeah, but we wanted to start off. We went on a tangent, which is nice, but like we wanted actually to start off with the definition of words. Okay, so we have 1 messy from 2 messy, 3 messy, 4, 5. Lovely, awesome. Okay. Yeah, definitions. The one thing that really struck me, and that is not just Peterson, but with other people. Yeah, eight you don't count. It's because you work with thingy with emergency. They always have to be orderly as hell for some reason. Okay, so you don't count. No, he does count, but still. When Jordan Peterson started to talk about what is truth, and then redefine truth during the hangout with Sam Harris. At first, it got me completely confused what he was even talking about. Because, you know, like, when you just hear truth as such, it's like, yeah, truth is truth. Truth is what is true. And so I tried to figure out a way to understand what Peterson might be thinking about. But the only thing I could come up with is when you, for example, have very restricted information, very restricted knowledge, there are certain things that you believe that are false, but you think they are true. That doesn't make them true, but you think they are true. And so when someone asks you about those things, like for example, if you're a flat earther and you have never heard about round earth, and someone asks you, is the earth round or flat? You will say it's flat, and that will be a truthful answer. You will say the truth.
No.
But it is not the real truth. And I think that is where the disconnect starts to kick in, where it's like, whether or not you truthfully say what you believe is the truth doesn't mean that the truth is actually what you believe.
Talk a minute. So to me, the main disconnect was, so the only thing that can be true or false for that matter that can hold a truth value is a statement.
Yes.
So I think Sam
You cut out. You cut out. Can you repeat that, please?
Sure. So I think Sam Harris, because he has a philosophy background, is saying that he's thinking, you know, truth is about statements only, and something has a truth value of true if the statement is made about a condition of the world at the time that it describes it accurately. So it's sort of a pairing up of ontology and whatever, epistemology. So like you know something at the same time that it happens to be the case. So that's the only way. That's the only thing that's true. Statements about reality,
Okay.
the state of reality.
Yeah.
And Jordan Peterson is talking about, but no, here's all these ways to acquire knowledge. And like, that's not the same thing.
Yeah, but he says acquire truth. He doesn't say acquire knowledge.
Well, I think that's what he's talking about. I mean, maybe he's using those words, but he's talking about how you know things or like types of knowledge you have.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the same thing as making a true statement.
So they basically
like,
just talk past each other, is what you're saying.
Exactly. That's why it went nowhere the first time, and I wanted to, I don't know.
So how can you know things?
How did he not get this?
How can you know things?
Oh boy, that is an entire subdiscipline of philosophy. Most of it is what we call through sense data.
Mm-hmm.
So like anything through your eyes, your ears, your nose, etc. And so there's different types of knowledge. So for example, there's experiential knowledge, which is not the same as, say, all acquired knowledge. So for the example I like to give is, let's say I know how to juggle and you don't, but you want to know.
Yeah.
I can just tell you how to do it. I can tell you everything you need to do to successfully juggle. But I couldn't just hand you the things you need, telling you that, and you could do it. You would have to actually try it and go through it, enough times to kind of get things down.
So you basically have to practice for yourself.
Yeah, so that's a type of knowledge that is usually called experiential knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Most modern epistemologists talk about sense data. That's what they focus on. But this kind of is actually one of the original splits between science and philosophy. Is I think was it Copernicus? It was right around the time that the telescope was invented.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe they were trying to see if there were craters on the moon. And so it's invented, and this sort of what's becoming, in the process of becoming science. These scientists are saying, see, we don't need philosophy anymore to tell us things about the world. We can just use empiricism and observe it.
Okay.
And then, of course, the philosophers say, well, yeah, that's not true because you still don't know that there's craters on the moon. All you know is you look in a telescope and you see a moon with craters on it. That's not the same. And so it's just like kicked off this history of sort of the natural sciences, especially physics, of sort of looking down their nose at philosophy because they'll like run their mouths, and then some philosopher will come along with like a counterexample or a reason that what they said is not true, and they don't like the fact that it's usually a statement that's to the extreme, but it's still true, so they have to accept it as absurd as it is, and it's upsetting. And now, obviously, I'm not talking about all. I mean, I have.
Okay, the last part cut out.
Together, but I'm just saying. So I have some friends that are physicists that I really enjoy working with. I'm just kind of giving them shit, but it is common. It is common that the discipline does not like philosophy.
Yeah.
But that's why. So you really. I'm trying to think of her name now. She's a really good modern epistemologist. Maybe I'll come up with it later. But
yeah,
that's what most of them talk about is sense data, because that's what you're relying on to know if something can have a truth value of true or not. Like whenever you make a statement. Now you can always get lucky. So like that's in philosophy, that's what's called the Gettier problem, because Gettier is the last name of the guy that sort of first came up with the concept. So like we talk about truth as a sort of like if you know something, it's a justified true belief. And usually you'll sometimes hear people add in something like plus the Gettier condition. What they're saying is, let's pretend that there's a bell tower, and it's far enough away that you can see the bell tower, but you can't quite see the clock. You can sort of make it out. You're trying to see what time it is. And you say to yourself, oh, you look at it and it's like, okay, say it's 8:30. So you're justified in thinking that because you looked at it, and to you, your observation through your sense data was the hands were in the position that it said 8:30.
Okay.
It happens to be 8:30 on the clock. What you said is correct. So that's the true part. And you're convinced by it. So that's a justified true belief.
Okay.
However, you get closer to it and you realize that it's stuck at 8:30. So that's the Gettier condition. It's kind of like getting lucky. So you can still know something without it. It gets weird. It's like, did you know that, or did you just, because your statement was true, you were justified in believing it, and that's the case, did you know it? So that's kind of what modern epistemologists sometimes talk about. I mean, it's generally...
Yeah, but it is like, we have Martin Mihawk here, who's like, Gettier is an unnecessary circle jerk that arises from the lack of a proper definition of a justified, of a justification is.
Yeah, I completely agree with that.
You know,
there's Stephen, what should I walk into? No, I completely agree with that. So there's a lot of modern epistemologists who are like, no, that's just included in you're not justified in believing it if you don't. If you can't accurately look at it, you should just not. That doesn't meet the condition of justification.
Yeah.
So you have a true belief, but it's not justified, so you don't know it. That's a pretty simple solution.
Well, you know, okay.
But that's where Peterson and Harris start talking past each other.
Yeah,
Peterson
obviously.
says,
No, but the thing is, they don't even understand that they talk past each other completely. Like when you hear Peterson talk, you know, he's so in his idea that he doesn't even quite understand where they lose each other. And Sam Harris has no idea what Peterson even talks about, because Peterson just suddenly tells him, oh yeah, by the way, truth is not really truth. And then Sam Harris goes like, how's truth not truth? What's wrong with you? You know? It's
I think when I look at them talking, or whatever you want to say, to me it's Harris knows what he's doing, like knows what Jordan is doing, and he's just frustrated by it, which is why he quit after a while.
Yeah.
If you listen later on, but Peterson's not getting it. He's like, what are you talking about? I can know things like through doing this, this, and this. And Sam's like, that's not what we're talking about. We're still trying to define it. That's not the same. And of course you're not going to go anywhere. It's like, it's a different version of, it's like you have to do things in order. So like when I talk to any religious person in like a sort of, you know, like we're actually talking about religion.
Okay.
If they talk about, I tell them, like, if it's an actual like conversation, like arguing for or against God.
Yeah.
I say, if you can't come to me with theism being true, we can't even begin to discuss what specific religion is true. And it's kind of like that. Like, if you can't agree that that's what truth is, like if everyone involved in the conversation doesn't comprehend what truth is, then it's pointless. It's absolutely pointless. There's no conversation to be had. And so that's kind of why Harris cut it short, and everyone's kind of up in a whatever. Peterson doesn't get it. Sorry. There.
You know, the thing, like with Peterson, I personally, and I have to, like, I throw my cards out here. I personally just can't stand the way he thinks. Because on one side he tries so much to be like scientific and truthful and honest, and because there is something to this whole, you know, like when he's afraid of this whole communist Russia nonsense, he's genuinely afraid of that stuff, you know.
Yeah, you can tell he's like legitimately terrified.
He's legitimately terrified, and the thing is, there are certain ideas that he has that in context, in the environment he lives in, you can very well get afraid of that, because it's not like you can say everything and do everything in those circles necessarily. And so he's justified in having certain worries. The problem is that he just goes completely over the top, where he has some ideas, and then just through his view, through his worldview, just completely messes up everything else. Like when he starts off, because I think there was this one. I saw several lectures of him where he just went bananas eventually. Where like you have a text, any text, because he really likes to take, I don't know, religious texts or even just Pinocchio, and then he starts to interpret into it. And at first, when he starts off, you can see it. You can see how he's getting to it or where he's getting it from. And then, at a certain point, he goes so far into interpreting that he just completely changes the meaning.
Yeah, he loves metaphors, and there's nothing wrong with metaphors as a teaching mechanism, but you gotta stay grounded. And he doesn't really do that. So like even let's pretend that so like his metaphor with Pinocchio, right? Let's pretend that works out for the sake of argument.
Mm-hmm.
And then the author of Pinocchio says, "Well, yeah, that's not what it's about, though. Like when I wrote it, I had this in mind."
Yeah.
That doesn't make it not useful. But the problem is, he just really, in my opinion, Jordan really goes off the rails when he's like he gets carried away with metaphor. That's why it's even how he looks at religion. So like one of the reasons I kind of tolerated him when I used to be kind of into his stuff, one of the reasons I tolerated his religious beliefs was because, as far as I could tell, he was kind of a pantheist, and he just liked sort of the Christian anthropomorphism, the Christian mythos that could describe that. And I was like, okay, so he's not a whatever. He's not some kind of Bible thumper or something that's going to annoy the crap out of me, and I won't get anything out of it. But that's like all he talks about. Like if you watch his online lectures, I mean, I'm sure there's some, but most of the ones I've seen, like you start like watching it, and at the beginning, it'll kind of be really useful as whatever story he's talking about. And he'll kind of slowly start skipping around to different cultural metaphors, and you can still be with it. It's like, okay, this is useful. This is going somewhere. But by the time you get to the end of that lecture, you're just like dizzy. You're like, where is he talking? Like, where's he coming from with all this stuff? I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. That's the impression I get. Like, the times he talks about, like, specifically about his psychological practice, like as his job, like when he uses clinical talk, like that's to me that's when he starts making sense and acting sane. But when he goes off the rails with the metaphors, that's the problem. I can't. I'm sorry. My mic is already all the
Is
way
he
up.
louder now? Let me see if I can fix that.
Okay.
I could try to put myself a bit down. Okay, say something.
Something. How is it?
Something.
Hello.
How about now? Guys,
How
how
about
about
now?
now? I'm probably more silent and he's not more loud. But it's balanced, I guess. So,
Okay.
yeah. And I forgot already what we were talking about. Very helpful.
Just Peterson and his sort of overuse of metaphors as a learning tool.
Yeah. No, like the thing. I'm still dominating. Okay, let me see. How about now? How about now? Okay. No, I put my volume even more down. So worst case, you have to pull the volume up. Yeah. So
Inappropriate. Hoosier.
No, it's fine. You know, that's the thing. On my no, because
I'm kidding.
we talked about this before the hangouts, the whole PC stuff, and how why it's annoying me. And I have decided on my account, when people tell me I have hot tits, when people tell me, you know, I have a hot voice, and when people, even if they start telling me I would totally jerk off on you, those are all things that I allow people to say in my comment section, because there is nothing really wrong with it. I do not get hurt. I'm completely somewhere else. You know, partially, I can't even read all of the comments anymore because there are just too many. So no one gets hurt. I think there is a guy who ordered my designer, my avatar designer, to make like this big body pillow, as far as I know, because I got asked for permission from the designer. You know, am I allowed to make a full-on body pillow from you, and how far can I go? Which I found very interesting. So I know that
Wow.
stuff is out there, right? And the thing is, it doesn't hurt me. If someone has a body pillow of an avatar of me that's like an anime or something, that doesn't hurt me. Why shouldn't I allow this? There's nothing deliberately hurting me. When people like, I don't know, when people really like my cutout, my nice heavy V cutout, then they like it. There's nothing wrong with it. You know, there's nothing that stops me from living my life if they like the way I look. Just so everything is allowed. And when they say yes, you have a hot voice, you know, just keep staying loud because you have a hot voice. I find that perfectly fine. Maybe that's just me.
I don't know. I don't have a problem. I've thought a lot about this and I'm not sure where I land on it still. So, like, one thing that really drives me crazy about Trump, out of many,
Hmm?
is he's sort of turned this whole not being PC thing into being an asshole, and you should be allowed to do that. But not just that, like, other people should have to tolerate it, and you shouldn't have any ramifications from it. He like runs with it to the extreme, and
Yeah.
so people do that. And it's like, sure, you can be like really messed up to someone, you're allowed to do that, but don't forget there's social consequences to that. Like, people are right in holding you to your word. It's not like you should not be able to just say or do whatever you want to other people, and then when they come back with an appropriate response, scream persecution and your First Amendment rights and my free speech and PC
Yeah.
culture. It's ridiculous.
You know, it's kind of a double standard in that case, I would say, because
Yeah,
on one side, they are perfectly fine with smearing, slurring, slandering, but if you then smear and slur and slander back, then it's like, oh no, you're not supposed to do that,
yeah.
right?
It's
And
kind of
that's what it boils down to at the end for those guys.
it's it's kind of ironic in the same way that um, people that love to rant about SJWs are, like the anti-SJWs, the hardcores. As soon as you like use certain vocabulary around them, they're the ones who like freak out and want a safe space.
You know,
It's
the
just
thing is, let's be honest here. No, because the thing is, the left and the right do exactly the same thing. Like, I don't like Hillary, I don't like Trump, I don't like any of them. I like the fact that Trump got voted in because I wanted to give a fuck you to everyone else. That was about the only reason, and that was about the only reason I could vote for, because everything else was completely off everywhere. And but overall, no matter if right or left or whatever political ideology the people hold, you always have this double think, this cognitive dissonance, where as soon as I talk about something you don't like, the people will get, you know, what we call SJW in a sense. The SJWs, as soon as you use, you know, a nasty word, you know, they will go off the charts. And then the Christians, the moment you go and bash a bit their little god, they go off the charts. You know, it's always the same. It's just a different topic.
well, yeah, but plus it's this strange paradoxical thing where it's like the thing you're trying to say you're against, you're acting like. So, like, here's a test. Uh, I like the concept of social justice. Now, if everyone's freaking out about that, that's not the same thing as being a social justice warrior. It's different. But you can say certain phrases and certain keywords, and people will lose their shit because they immediately think they understand you and whatever. Like they're too quick to not hear you out, and it's obnoxious. So like that's to me that's something that I dislike about the sort of extreme PC stuff.
You know, partially the funny thing is, you know, with this PC thinking, that it completely shoots back. Like as you said, the word social justice prior to this whole social justice warrior nonsense had a very different meaning. And then because of the fact that people just drove it too far and dug it too hard and just messed with it too much, now when you say social justice, just people do not understand anymore what the original core idea was. And yeah, they will consider, they will think we are talking about social justice warriors.
Yeah, well, at least in the sort of, I mean, as far as I can tell, it's the sort of community that we run in. Yeah, I would agree with that. But like when I'm at university and like we talk about social justice, nobody there is thinking or acting of like a social justice warrior or behaving that way. They don't even know that term most of the time. It's like this is really just like
yeah, but wait until they come out of university. You know, Steven Pinker said already. Just tell them that men and women are different, and then they will all turn racist, right? I'm joking.
You know, I have a lot of respect for Steven Pinker, but I'm sorry, like that's just not reality. He gets it because he's a sort of like high profile academic. So he sees it all the time. But I'm telling you, like that's not from it. And that's why I think the community is wasting its time with this crap. But
I think no, and I tell you why. It's because it doesn't matter how small a radical community is. It is a radical community, and so you have to push against it. Like think about it like this: Muslim community. The vast majority of Muslims do not want to get you killed. However, because of the fact that the vast majority of Muslims hold a certain belief with certain core sets, you will always have the potential that one or two of them go the extreme way and just, you know, get nuts and just start killing infidels. And now we get demonetized, by the way. Anyway, so not like we were monetized in the first place. So the thing is, you know, the radical beliefs, or take flat Earth. If you don't want to go religious, take flat Earth is kind of religious, but take flat Earth. The people who believe in flat Earth, you know, you can say, yeah, it's a very small, you know, silly minority. They don't really do much harm, but they do much harm because the moment you leave them unchallenged, they will crawl out of the woodwork. You know, I have seen a rise in flat Earth videos in my feed from people. First of all, from sites I wouldn't expect to see them. And secondly, so many suddenly, where it's like they just popped out of nowhere. And it's like the reason they pop out of nowhere is because no one really talked about them that much anymore. And then suddenly they just came back again. And then when you see someone like Jordan Peterson talking, I mean, I restrict myself now on our YouTube sphere because that's what we're talking about. That's the people we are talking with. But like when Jordan Peterson came along, and you suddenly saw atheists buying into what he said, and then suddenly starting to turn slightly religious, basically, forgetting everything that they learned, you know, months ago or even half a year ago, it kind of gets you worried. And the reason that people bought into it so much was he came from an angle they weren't aware of. Like usually when you hear, you know, religious stuff, you hear the preacher who tells you, you know, you'll burn in hell or whatever. You never really hear about the guy who comes along and talks about transcendental woo-woo. You never really do that. And now suddenly there is a professor, you know, university professor, and he talks about transcendentalism here and transcendentalism there. You haven't heard about this ever. And now suddenly you buy into it. Why? Because you have no idea what the hell is going on. And so unless you actually sit back and look at this and kind of pull your hair out, which most people don't even have the time to do that with everything, you will end up kind of, I would nearly say infected, the way Pinker put it. And yes, so yeah, maybe it's a small group, but they can do a huge damage overall over time, which is why it doesn't matter which small group makes the mess and how minute and how insignificant they are at the moment. You do not want them to get more ground. And I think the best thing to see that is if you look at Europe, at Europe right now, you have right-wing populism rising incredibly fast, you know, because of all the mess that happened with the people coming in. So that is a very huge worry and a very huge concern. The core problem came from the other side, it came from the left, but now you have all these people who get exposed to ideas that many people thought, you know, are at least pushed to the edges, pushed to the corner, and people don't even buy into it, and people know it's bad. But now those people come out and expose the common, you know, the common everyday housewife, the common everyday worker with these ideas. And they have never heard about them, they have never heard the counter-argument, and they will buy into it. You know?
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's a reasonable line, and I also don't like. So like when someone holds a position that I don't agree with, and it's something that I consider absurd, I try and avoid talking about it like they fell for something or like it's a trick, because especially if it's just an opinion, like if it's not a sort of factual based. Um, because I mean, that's what they think, and I think something different. Why am I not, falling for something and they are? You know what I mean? I don't know.
I would argue that there is a very, very easy solution for that.
Okay.
And that is, if you have an opinion and someone else has a different opinion, the best way to figure out which opinion is better is to just test them both. Where it's like, okay, so we have those two opinions. Do they hold up to scrutiny? Both of them. And then just like, find scenarios where this would apply and not apply, and see what the other person thinks. Right? Like, for example, if a person thinks, we should have, we should have social health care for everyone, and this is how it should work, then if I would be, for example, against healthcare, which I'm not, but let's assume, the best way for me to figure out whether or not he's right or he's wrong, or she's right or she's wrong, the best way to do this would be, okay, so if we have this healthcare, how does it work? How does it, have an impact on taxes? How would you, organize it? How would you sponsor it? How would you deal with certain instances of people, for example, who would abuse it? How would you deal with, and by coming up with those scenarios, and by seeing how the person reacts to those scenarios, not only do you get a better insight of how the person thinks and if there is actually some kind of logical thinking to it, but you also get to question yourself, because in this scenario, would your own opinion actually hold up? Would your own way of thinking actually hold up, in that scenario? And
right.
So, yeah.
That's not quite what I meant. I meant, so like opinions, like my favorite color is red. I mean, that's an oversimplistic one, but that's kind of what I meant. And the other person's like, no, the best color is blue. It's like, that's not something you can really do that to. But if you're talking about thinking ideas are correct in their their description of how things work, back to truth. Yes, and I agree with you, and that's why I think in the United States that basic critical thinking courses should be mandatory, like in the core curriculum of even high schools, and they're not. Because if that were the case, you would have much better thinkers coming out of even high school. Like, so even if you can't afford something like higher education, if you live in a country that charges for it directly, then at least you're not totally SOL when it comes to understanding your world.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can put things to the test. I mean, obviously we can do that on a reasonable level, but
yeah, no, but like, for example, sorry if I interrupt you. Marty Mihawk brings out something, like, I use flat earthers because that is something that just happens to be more current. But he's absolutely right when he says, believing the earth is flat is not as bad as, for example, believing that you should not vaccine your kid because the kid gets autism, because that can have very, very devastating, effect on the population. As soon as not enough kids are vaccinated or people are vaccinated, you can have a huge epidemic and epidemic. Yeah, and like get a lot of people killed potentially. So
right,
and that, like, anti-vaccine is also I don't know, a vocal but not that big of a group. But still, because of the fact that not everyone opposes them or not many oppose them, they did get a lot of ground, even in places where you wouldn't even think they would. Like, in places like Europe, at least in the places I was living in, people didn't really question whether or not you should vaccinate your kids. And yet, there were already the first few people that popped out and said, no, I do not vaccinate my kids because that's harmful to them. And then there were more and more, and now even there, you had issues with people who just, would get stuck with this ideology because they never really heard the counter argument either.
Yeah, and maybe this would be a good way to sort of segue into what you and I were talking about earlier, because that could be a way to sort of call that sort of behavior.
Yeah. The thing with, like, I tried with the Jordan Peterson video that I put up. Yeah, Martin. Anti-vax is happening here, yeah. There are a lot of things that start off in the US and they pop over to Europe eventually.
So we're kind of like the test bed.
Yeah, you always start it off, and that's one of, like, whenever something goes really bad, we tend to start saying, well, the Americans are at fault, because usually where we get it from first is from the US, because you started off. Which is fun, and sometimes it's not even true. Sometimes we started off, but then just on a very different scale, and then, it just, like, floats over to your place, and then you really, really like that idea, and you promote it, or at least some people over there do, and then suddenly it's so hyped up and promoted over there that it comes back to us, and then we basically get, like, a steroid version of what we started with.
Well, it happens within the US too. So, like, there's certain parts of the US where you can go, and there's like the sort of cultural ideas or social ideas that are current. Give it like a year or so, and a different part of the US will then, like, start taking that on in the same way that Europe would take it from the United States. So it's it occurs even within the United States.
Yeah.
But I think so. Like we were talking earlier, the biggest problem is lack of education.
Yeah, but even with education, you have to be careful, though, because we do not know everything, and we have to teach children something,
Right.
It is because of the studies that we've made, we can say with a very high certainty that the earth is not flat, so we can teach that to our children. But before something gets into the school, it has to pass a lot of, it should at least pass a lot of hurdles of whether or not it is actually accurate. And that doesn't always happen, especially because politics are way too involved in education. And on the same note, it also happens that even the people educating, because of the belief they grow up in, or the surrounding they live in, or the kind of people they are surrounded by, even the educators sometimes, or even often, without noticing too much, will pass on falsehoods, wrong information, or even just their opinion that will get picked up one-on-one by children, and then start to be turned into a dogma by them. So there are a lot of things where we have to be careful with education, where, you can say people have to be educated, but the education system has to be such that when they get educated, they don't end up believing more woo-woo than they started with.
Yeah, that's kind of why I think, formal, like, critical reasoning or even informal logic is important, is because it doesn't just teach you to think something, it teaches you how to think. So then you're better equipped to think about specific topics. Whereas, like, if you're convinced by something because you don't hear something better, I mean, who can blame you for that?
Yeah.
That's one of the things I dislike about the internet. Because it's relatively inexpensive and it's captivating in a lot of ways that something like television is. It's very easy for people that don't know better to sort of buy into nonsense, like the anti-vaxxers. Like, they legitimately think that. They don't, I mean, they're not, like, being jerks and doing it on purpose just to piss you off as a non-anti-vaxxer. Like they seriously think that. And almost every single one of them gets that idea, not just from the internet, not just from people talking about it as if, like someone they like, but they don't have the critical thinking skills, let alone the education to understand how ridiculous that is. It
Mm.
doesn't matter that it's out there. They either don't know how to look for it or they just like it because they like it's an opinion.
Yeah, although
In the same way that like you would watch a particular media outlet, like in the United States, if you watch Fox as a news channel, like you should know better at this point. It's so obvious that it's a joke. Seriously, it's like not quite on the extreme as Alex Jones, but even then, there's people that take it seriously. So it makes me wonder what the sort of mix is of like original people or core group of people that actually think stuff like that,
mm,
and then like the rest of the people just think it's fun or something. I don't know, but it seems to me there's a baseline of reasonableness. And so in the same way that you can sort of hand wave away Alex Jones and his tribe or whatever, yeah, they're going to exist and be a sort of bubbling undercurrent in culture that you're going to see occasionally, but they're not a threat in the same way. And that's how I view things like social justice warriors or feminists, which is kind of in that category.
you
It's like,
know,
sure, they're annoying,
I
whatever,
would
but like
like,
I'm not gonna see that as like a problem. Like to me it's a waste of time.
yeah, to you personally, but I would like to point out something here. And that is
Sure.
something I've heard secondhand, where you don't have just like the one side, like the SJWs and the left that just got, some of them just got completely off the chart crazy. You have the same issue having
Uh,
on the right, where, for example, you have a lot of people who tried to oppose this because it went too far, left, that then bought into certain ideologies that just go way too far to the right. And I don't really want to, make any names, but I have heard that there are certain people who are in these circles who try everything they can to get the heck out because people get way too dogmatic and way too worked up by things that are just not true. And for example, I saw Computing Forever put out a video talking about a newspaper talking about a scientific paper, basically. So the scientific paper showed a very particular thing. The newspaper, having the super hyper left lens, interpreted all kinds of, nastiness into it. And he, having his slightly too much already, tainted lens from the counter movement, basically, challenged them and told them they're wrong, while at the same time doing the same thing and putting his own ideology on top of the research. And when I saw this, I was
yeah.
like, you're basically teaching to yourself without realizing. It just really got
Yeah.
it gets to you,
I'm I'm kind of laughing, and this isn't to like anything to Dave personally, not that I know him, but
No, he's a
yeah,
nice guy. The problem is just that he gets like into certain things. He takes certain things too easily for granted. That's his basic problem. And he's a very nice guy. I don't want to say anything negative about him, and he has a lot of nice videos. It's just this particular video got to me.
well, that's the reason I was kind of laughing is because he was also for me the first person that I kind of realized in the sort of skeptic circles that maybe there's something going on here with the whole article citing and study type thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I forget. I think he was talking about. I want to say it was Muslim immigrants,
Hmm.
and he cited certain papers. This is so long ago. I feel bad that I can't come up with it. So it's don't count on me like that. But
Okay.
just as sort of a personal story, he cited news articles, and those articles cited criminal statistics and things like that. And I went and I looked just out of curiosity because I thought, well, like he's not where I am at all, like geographically.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if this paper he's talking about is like reputable or if it's like a tabloid like joke.
Mhm.
So I wanted to just look at the study. So I pulled up the study. It took some hunting, and it was there were two things wrong. One thing that was wrong was the paper that it was talked about in didn't understand it right. And then on top of that, he didn't quite get it right.
Mhm.
So it created this sort of domino effect of misunderstanding. And then that kind of like now I just do that. Now whenever I see a news article, whether or not it's talked about in YouTube content or whatever, that tries to cite studies, I track it down and look at it myself. Now, the reason that still a problem is not a lot of people do that, and
Yeah.
it's not because they can't necessarily. Like they may not have the ability. So like I'm fully aware that because of my education, I can do that. Like I can look at things like stats and understand if they're kind of being used in a way that's for a particular angle. Or I can see if it's, the methods they're using or the journal it's published in is reputable or in their methods. I can do that because of my education. Not everybody has my education. A lot of people don't. And so they don't know. They just have to go on what they kind of think makes sense on, face value. And that's not a good guide. So like that's one thing that I really don't like about the internet.
And
It gives you access, but you don't know how to use it. So it's very easy to create these sort of subgroups or cultures of things that are absolutely batshit, like the anti-vax or flat earthers, that you should just be like, yeah, okay, you're crazy. Like if you encountered someone in real life, at least I would, that
mhm.
told me the earth was flat, I would just laugh at them. I wouldn't have a serious discussion with them about why the earth's not flat. But the internet creates that.
Yeah, no, and the thing is, because many people, when they hear, yeah, there's like this research paper and that research paper, not only don't they necessarily have the ability to follow those papers or follow, in general, the idea of the paper, but also there is a level of trust where
Exactly.
they basically go like, okay, you know what, he brings like this paper and stuff, and this is a thing I can follow and I can trust, so therefore, why should I really bother? I don't understand scientific stuff anyway, you know and when
Right.
we were talking a while ago about the neutrality of the press, where you said,
Uh-huh.
they were straightforward with, we are biased, this is how we are biased, and then there was this wave where they wanted to be just accurate and objective, and that just doesn't quite work out that well. And now we are
Uh-huh.
basically shifting back to, we're just straightforward bias without much of a shade on front of it. um, I think that there ought to be the how should I say, we should force media to be honest about those things, because they can put a tweak on it much as they want, and people will not be able to go to the research paper, for example, and check it out, like the same way in the video he made, um, in the video thing he made, he pointed out that the media had these biases and shoved them in. When you compare it to the paper, you will see that this is all just basically propaganda. And the people will read it and it will be like, okay, so this is actually what the paper says, which is not correct, because the paper says something completely different. Papers are something very, I would nearly say, I mean, unless they're like super artistic, where they go completely off the charts, because that's also an issue, but those usually don't end up in peer-reviewed journals. The papers that are straightforward, they will tell you, okay, so this is what we researched, this is what we studied, this is how we did it, and this is what came out. They will use certain words that you may not be knowledgeable about. They will use certain maths that you don't necessarily know, but at the end of the day, that's what it boils down to. And then you go to the newspaper and they will say like, oh, and by the way, like, this is sexist and this is racist and this is this and this is that, and then you pick that up as if it is part of the paper. and this should not be something the media is capable of, because the internet shouldn't be capable of this, but neither should the mainstream media. And I think if we have a standard we should apply to everyone, we should say, okay, the mainstream media ought not to do this, the internet ought not to do this, but how do we stop it? If we allow it to one, then we have to allow it for the other, and the other way around. Like, we don't have to, but we end up doing it because we create a loophole.
What you're talking about with the media is kind of one of the few things that I think is positive because of Trump and his fake news crap. So like, because of all this nonsense where he's just constantly lying and he just calls something fake news if he doesn't like it, it's forced media in the United States anyway to really like bone up on their skills. So things like, I mean, it's already this way. It was already this way before, but not quite as rigorous. So if you follow me on Twitter, it's no secret I like the Washington Post. The reason I like the Washington Post is because it's very clear in the sections where it's trying to be objective and in the sections where it's trying to, stating an opinion. But it's also like there's a middle ground that they have. I think it's called The Fix. But like, even when you look at it, it like forces you to like, it pops up this thing that says, hey, this is composed of conclusions based off of things we know, or something like that. It's like, hey, you're just a heads up.
Yeah.
This is the author's opinion based on facts, but this is what we're doing here.
But
so,
that
like,
would be already the fix. That would be already the fix. Like, you put in a disclaimer, you put it right on the top. Everyone has to see the disclaimer, read the disclaimer, and then you go on. And as soon as you put that in, everyone will be fine.
Yeah. So there's that, and I don't really like long-form journalism, but the New York Times has an awesome reputation. And one thing they've started doing, and this is really new in media, is, I think it's Eric Wimple, like the Wonk blog. He does it. Washington Post does this too, but now they have like in-house self blogs. Like, it's unusual to have someone basically talk shit about their editor under the same banner, like the same publication. And so they've kind of started this where it's like, it's kind of has a self-checking mechanism. It's better organized. They understand now that if they slip up in the slightest, that they're going to get jumped on for it. So they're really on top of it as much as they can. And then if they happen to make a mistake because they're human, they immediately issue a correction and, try and make sure everyone sees it just as much as the original. Like, they're really on top of this. And because of that, I think I commented on Neon Eater's post today on Twitter that was talking about Trump and his web of media bias, or trust in media. And I don't think it's trust, it was apathy, but subscriptions to the Washington Post and New York Times are actually up. They're doing better. And so I think people know this stuff. But the problem I have, I know people that couldn't pick up those papers and comprehend them, at least not to the level that would be useful. Okay. They would have a hard time understanding what's being said. And so there's this sort of like, but they can't like not talk about it. Yeah. And they're not going to talk about, they have to talk about it at a certain level to where they comprehend whatever they're talking about. They can't, it's not possible to talk in a more simplistic level than the actual material itself. So there's automatically going to be people that's based on their literacy level alone. So that's another reason that I think education is really important. Because if you don't have an informed citizenry, that's a real problem. Like, on so many levels, I don't even know where to begin. But governance is a really obvious one. So, like,
to be fair, education is basically directly connected to wealth of the population. If your population is not well educated, you don't make much money. They don't make much money. Your country suffers. But just to get back to this whole media thing, because there was this thing where Tyler was like, so you basically want to restrict the newspaper, and then Martin was, popping in and jumping in and being like, that's not actually what you're supposed to do. So let me just clarify this, just to be clear. When I said that you have to either allow it for one, or like you have to either restrict it for all or not for one, or you have to allow it to everyone. I didn't mean that you have to stop them from saying anything. So when I say that you want, for example, to restrict them to put in bias, then something like, for example, a logo, a label, a notification, that would be already enough. Because on one side, you want people to say what they want, as much as they want, as much as possible. But at the same time, you don't want someone who is not a doctor to be able to declare himself a doctor and make operations that can, have fatal effects. So what you have to do is to find a way to let people say what they want, but give the possibility for other people to recognize who they're dealing with or what they're dealing with. And so I think the labeling that Shifty brought up is actually a very good one.
Yeah, that's like I was thoroughly impressed with that. Hold on just a second. Sorry. So yeah, I'm impressed with this sort of like kick in the pants the media's got. But I hate talking about Trump, but it's always like you just
You,
have
you,
to.
I
Ugh.
have to say, really like Trump. Like, you really like to not like
Oh,
Trump.
like it's obnoxious. I want him out of my news. But anyway,
Yeah, but I have to say
but
that's partially problem of the news, because they really like to cash on him.
yeah, what doesn't help that he's a total dunce. But
There are so many PMs who are complete dunces. That doesn't mean that the media has to focus on them. Like, we have enough
yeah.
dunces in the country to not always focus on the PMs.
I don't think we're used to a certain level of like I don't know. I would say the people that don't have a lot of confidence in the U.S. government that are U.S. citizens, um, that's just what it is. It's like they do whatever they have this attitude of like, well, politicians just do whatever they want. It was generally not, they're gonna do this crazy thing. Like it would be like one issue and it would like polarize people or something like that. But like with Trump, it's just day after day of just
Can I
insane
can I
moves.
disagree with you there for a moment? Because I don't think that Trump is so much different than so someone says the volume is too low. Which ones? Whose volume is too low? Okay, so and by the way, once in a while I'm just away from the microphone, that may be it, or I'm too close to the microphone. I don't know. So when we talk about Trump, he is not the core problem. The problem was there already, and it was there with Obama, it was there with Bush, it was there with Clinton, it was there with a lot of people. I've seen this years ago already, where people just basically can do what they want. Just the difference is they were packaging it, they were putting ribbons on top of it, and how should I say, beauty splaining it in a sense. And Trump comes over, and the only thing that he genuinely changed was he took off the ribbons. Because all of these things were happening before with all those other people. The only reason you're so aware of it is that he doesn't bother to put nice, beautiful, nice, chatty ribbons on top of it.
Well, it's not I'm not really speaking so much to the level of obviousness or whatever you want to say that he's doing things. It's that the things he's particularly doing, the subject itself is too far out there that it just
In what sense?
kind of gets stuck on that. I was trying to go the route of one of the things that like actually genuinely, it's not just like, oh, he's a moron and I just kind of roll my eyes, what's he said the day. One thing that actually like really disturbs me about this guy, ignoring the fact that he's ironically a functional illiterate adult. I'm not kidding, that's true. Um, the things he's doing, most of the decisions that he's making that cause harm in the country impact the people the most, like that demographic, that can't understand it. That's why you like, I don't know if you can tell this from like an outside perspective, but like when you look at Trump rallies and the people that are there, cheering him on, and it's like he's screwing you over. How do you not see this? And then you realize it, that it's like just a bad joke. Like the economic policies that he's enacting, things like that. It's hurting the people that are cheering him on. They just think it's great because he's telling them it's great, and that's what they have to go off of. Like, they don't understand how to like look at a tax bracket
Yeah.
and see if it's going to be a negative. They don't know how to do that. They don't have the education, so
Yes.
they're stuck,
Yeah,
and they're unaware of it.
but the thing is, there were a lot of other Republicans who are voted in by the same people ish, who just went the same route and said, hey, we are making you save taxes if we implement this and this and that. It's not like they did a different thing. All he does is he goes, dudes, you're gonna save money, I'm gonna do it. There you go.
It's an attempt to explain, though. Like, I'm old enough to remember, for example, this is probably the most valiant attempt, I guess I would say, to when Ross Perot was running for president of the United States. And he's like this crazy rich person. And he actually, with his own money, bought airtime on TV and explained to people, like in an educational fashion, like he had charts, like how he would fix the economy in his eyes. And like, even if he was wrong, like he was trying really hard to make sure you understood why what he was saying he thinks is a good idea. So like, props to that guy because that was crazy
But
awesome.
that
And
is the
I
exception,
think
though.
other well, I know, but I think there's at least a legitimate attempt on most politicians' part
I
because
disagree.
they understand that they have to get elected to try and explain it to somebody. Like, nobody just stands up there and goes, yeah, it's great. Like, Trump is the only one that just says it's good with no attempt whatsoever to describe it, other than it's like positive like adjectives. it's, it's like he doesn't even tell you what it does. He just tells you 5 ways of seeing how great it is. So like, it forces people to really kind of look for, care about politics more. It forces them to make, journalists to be more careful about what they say. There's a kind of positive effect out of this whole thing, but you still get a problem
Can
of
I give you a very
when he
different way
lies,
of
it's hard to
thinking?
tell him.
Because the
When
thing
he lies,
is,
it's hard for people to tell
yeah,
he's lying to.
but so
Anyway,
is with other politicians. No, but I want to point at something very, very important.
okay,
And that is, you say all these things, and I understand you. I understand where you're coming from. I don't agree, but I understand you. But there is something that I think you may not necessarily take into consideration. Those
okay,
people who don't understand the politics, yeah,
uh-huh.
when they hear some politician going pseudo-intellectual and telling them how it's good, they have just as few chance to understand whether or not it's right as when Trump does it. What Trump
You mean like their
does,
ability?
yes,
Okay,
because they don't know. They just don't know. They don't have the knowledge that is necessary to understand whether or not it's actually helping.
okay,
The difference seriously with Trump and the other politicians, because the other politicians go a bit, how should I say, intellectualism. They go intellectualism, and the people who are affected by it, they cannot follow them even,
right.
So
So they're
at the
turned
end of
off
the
by it.
day, neither side has much of a thingy. The reason they cheer for Trump is because Trump, quote unquote, dumps it down for them. And the thing, because Trump doesn't help them necessarily. Trump is not, a worse, horrible, evil person, but like, he's just a normal politician in my eyes. He just goes a very different route where he basically goes, we're going to do this. He's putting in a show. He's putting in a show in this whole politics business. He's the usual corrupt politician, just he puts on a show. And the reason why it, resonates with the people who, don't have the higher education is because the show is understandable. The politician who
Yeah,
is not. And so
I
what
can get.
happens is he shows you as a person or the other politicians. He shows them a set of the population they cannot reach because they do not dump stuff down. They do not make it clear. They do not make it edible, let's say, for a very huge chunk of the population. And so as much as I don't like the fact that he's just like the standard politician, I do like the fact that he has basically found a niche of people that don't really get talked to normally. They just get completely ignored, because the people who make excuses for certain tax cuts or certain, tax changes or anything, they always talk intellectually. And he does not. He talks to those people. He talks to the people no one else talks to. And that's what resonates with the people. And so if you want to improve politics, then I would say the first step would be add those people to your to-do list, because those are a huge chunk of the population who actually want to be counted as well. And the education system is bad. You cannot educate from today on tomorrow millions of people. That doesn't work.
Right.
But what you can do is you can take what you have, this hyper complicated tax stuff, and turn it either into an analogy or turn it into something more simple that people can relate to, and then explain it. Because that's what they can get.
I could say that there's a significant amount of people that applies to, and I agree that they've been ignored. But I do think there's a middle ground of the demographic of the voting population where they're intelligent enough to understand if a politician were to reasonably explain it to them, whether or not that they should agree with them. And that's who I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I do. You're kind of hitting on why I think education is so important.
Yeah.
That's one of the weaknesses of democracy, is it assumes that your populace is educated.
Yes.
If you got a bunch of uneducated people in your population, forget like stupid. Like, just pretend that they could be intelligent. They just don't have access to the education that would make them at least informed, let alone intelligent. That's not the same.
Yeah.
That's the assumption. That's a huge assumption for democracy.
The thing is though, education has to be like focused. You don't teach the people just this happened in the past, this happens in the future, and here and there you go. You have to focus on what is necessary to be taught. For example, unless you teach people critical thinking, knowing what has happened and what will happen will not allow them to actually critically examine something,
Right.
History
that's how you get dictators.
Yeah, history is basically, propaganda of the past, unless you A, show both sides, or B, give people the ability to figure it out by themselves whether or not this is actually 100% correct.
Yeah, that is how you get authoritarian rulers. Like, and I don't mean in like the traditional sense. I mean like autocrats or dictators. Like, you wonder how people, say, living in North Korea or something like that, don't, like, you look at they behave. It's like, how do you not see that this is a huge problem? That's to the extreme, but that's what that is. It's like, once you get a population that just completely, doesn't have the tools, the thinking tools to sort of judge a politician, they're reliant on someone to make decisions for them. If someone malicious comes along and manages to sort of work their way in socially into that government, that's a huge problem. Like, that's how you get rulers like that. All the population. So, like, one of the things that I pay attention to, just thanks to Neeb, if you're listening, is North Korea. Like, I've been looking at them. And a lot of times, like, it intersects with, I have a large interest in national security. And people will talk of in those circles will talk of like this black hole of intelligence. That's what they call North Korea. And they don't have a method outside of like kind of babysitting North Korea to change anything about it. It's so walled off. And every time I look at that, I think, what are you talking about? All your weapons are already inside North Korea. It's the people.
Yeah.
Like, that's like when you see things like South Korea blares counter propaganda with megaphones over the border, or like sends things with balloons. Like, they got it right. That's how you do it. And it's what that is it's a more educated population trying to help a less educated population so that they can wake up, so to speak, and realize what's going on with their country's leader and how things could be better.
Can we maybe because there's like this did Klatz and Martin, do you guys want to join the hangout? Because you two seem to have quite a interesting discussion out there.
Yeah, I've been trying to follow it. Not
You know, they're a
doing
bit
the
too
best
fast
job.
for us, and also my keyboard doesn't work, so I'm kind of left out. But it will be interesting, because the thing is, they both seem to have a very slightly different view of things, which would be very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be okay with it.
Yeah, no, the question is because we have to think that the hangout is delayed. And oh, by the way, I managed to get people back into the hangout again. Isn't that amazing, guys? Yay! Yeah. Also, this is way too serious, Shifty.
Yeah.
We did not
chill.
drink enough, and I think my main problem was that I like spilled half of the stuff all over my stuff. Because yeah, that was partially technical issues. My internet broke off, and then I spilled my coffee over my keyboard, so I had to unplug it and plug in another keyboard. I seriously hope I didn't break the keyboard, because otherwise Logic will get completely upset. Upset is nicely put, by the way. Because it's his favorite keyboard, you know.
Oh no.
It's like so high-techy keyboard where, you know, you can program the colors of the keys. You know, extra safe for it. It's yeah, and like he likes that kind of stuff. He likes programming, but he kind of got disillusioned because, you know, if you're too much into programming and other people find out, they kind of abuse your knowledge and your talent a bit.
Oh yeah,
so he had this phase, yeah, and he had this phase where he had to turn off, and now suddenly he's back into it. So he tinkers around a lot, which is cute. Okay.
I'm that way with hardware in any way.
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to say something kind of real quick about something I saw fly by in the chat. I forget who said it now, but it's what we were kind of talking about a little bit earlier, with not knowing that you don't know enough, basically, is I think someone said you get that problem with physics or something, but you get that problem in tech too. So like if someone says, like, let's say it's a friend of yours, and they say, hey, my computer doesn't work, and I'm like, well, what's wrong with it? It's like, well, if I could tell you what's wrong with it, I wouldn't be asking you to help me fix it. like you are reliant on them being somewhat competent, and democracy is the same way. Anyway.
Okay, so guys, if someone wants to join the hangout, send me a DM, and I'm gonna send you the link. Let's do it like this. DM in Twitter, by the way, because otherwise I won't be able to read it.
Yeah, don't be like me and send hangouts. That's mean. Yeah.
Well, you know, I guess I muted it, so I wouldn't even see if someone sends me hangouts.
That's my fault.
Okay. No, I just, you know, I offered the offer, and there we go. So let's lighten things up a bit. You know, I seriously think you take Trump too seriously, though. I'm sorry. I seriously think you take Trump too seriously. You know, maybe it's because I'm used to people like Berlusconi. So the politicians that are like Trump, just, you know, we have them on a regular basis. Maybe it's a bit of a cultural thing. And maybe you're just too spoiled. Maybe you're just too spoiled. And people are too PC. But I seriously don't see a difference between other politicians and Trump. Trump, seriously, he's an entertainer more than a politician. But at the end of the day, he seriously just does politics like everyone else. I understand the people who are like, yeah, he's not good, he's not great. Yeah, well, duh. And then at the same time, I have the people who are like, no, he's actually a horrible president and stuff. And I'm like, seriously? If you think he is bad, you should check out other countries. Just say.
Yeah, I think maybe 2 or 3 things going on with me personally with the whole Trump thing is, one, I have a very strong affinity for the intelligence community and the work they do. and I consider him a traitor, along with several people that are obviously about to be indicted.
Okay.
I have a personal investment in that because of friends. Um,
Okay. The
so that's part of it. And then the other sort of part I think you kind of brought up that I'm willing to concede is most of the time up until now, most politicians at like a high level in the United States have been moderate left or moderate right. So it's not like no one's going out and blowing up the world like this guy is. That's kind of the reason
To
I'm
be
just
fair,
like,
he did not yet
what
start
is
a
happening?
war. He did not yet start a war.
Yeah, he
I
wanted
have to
to.
say, no, but wanting and doing is a bit of a different thing. There are
He
a
got
lot of
threatened.
presidents you have who started wars, and he did not yet get to this. The moment he starts a
Yeah,
war, we
wait.
can talk again.
He loves him some North Korea, so we'll see. Anyway,
Wouldn't North Korea be the first war where it's actually not about oil?
where it's what?
Where it's not about oil?
Oh, yeah, I don't buy that. I think I don't think our wars have been about oil. I mean, you can see what we've done with the money when we've had to say we do things like capture oil sites because that's how people like ISIS make their money to stay funded. We don't like hold on to it for a power grab. Like we give it back to the country once it's established and we use the funds to give it back. So I don't think that's why we go over there.
But then you had like all this, because there were a lot of like secular, I would nearly say secular, not necessarily even secular, but just not as religious heads of state, mostly dictators that you got rid of, and then just the hell broke loose pretty much.
Yeah.
And it's like, on one side, I understand, you don't really want people to feel bad, you don't really want people to be harmed and hurt. But on the other hand, this is a very different country where there are a lot of countries where people get harmed and abused by the government. And the way they got picked and chosen was kind of dodgy, I would nearly say.
We got some chatter here about my statement that I don't think our wars are about oil. They're not. Like you could easily look to see what has been done and why. So there's two general things going on. One is uh, states doesn't intervene in certain areas where it's kind of none of their business, as people like to say.
Mm-hmm.
Other people will, and they're not going to be doing the things the United States does on a moral level.
I have to say,
That's how power vacuums work.
but the thing with the United States is, um,
Like that's what's wrong with the whole region of Syria right now. We took too long, and now we got this crazy like patchwork of Iran and just like all these proxy wars. It's a mess, and the reason it's a mess is because we took too long to step in. Like that's the kind of thing that we tend to prevent as a country. Like we're not going. I understand it looks like okay, it doesn't directly affect the United States, on the face of it. Why are they going over there and doing this thing? And it's like, yeah, well, the United States understands that it has to keep a world order, not just for itself, but for the sake of stability, its own survival. Like that's why the US is so young, but it's the world superpower. And then the second component is the United States doesn't care about peace. They care about stability. That's not the same thing. That's why they don't care if you're a dictator oppressing your people if you're not causing problems like in the community. But if you start acting up, expect some fighter jets or some Navy SEALs.
yeah, but then I don't understand quite. Like, North Korea is acting up quite heavily. So why would you
Well,
be against a war against North Korea but not one against Syria?
I'm not against it. I'm not really sure how I feel about war, other than it would cause problems with like logistical problems, not on a moral level. So, like, one reason that it'd be a really bad idea to militarily attack North Korea is the sort of the general population that happens to not be a part of their world's largest army. um, their military is insanely large, by the way. Would be they would be fleeing the country, and they would almost certainly flee to China, China and South Korea. China is not going to deal with that. They can't. Like that will cause massive migration. South Korea is not equipped, and they're such a close ally of the United States. They're practically a territory. Like it's just a mess waiting to happen. Like you can't. So the best route with North Korea, in my opinion, is sort of aggressive diplomacy with a sort of, uh, you know, maybe war in your back pocket, just as a sort of keep them on check.
Yeah, but
So like
you see, basically what you're doing now, or what you would consider the US doing, is you basically have, okay, now, if we intervene, they will have this huge migration, and that will affect a state that is directly connected to us. Okay?
right.
So
Well,
that will
except
affect
for China.
us. If we, well, yeah, China is a different story, but even China, like, when you went into Syria, and we got all the Syrian migrants, that affected Europe. But that didn't bother you.
Well, not me personally. If I'm not the spokesperson for the United States, but that's the intent. I can tell you that. It's not like they don't. The United States government doesn't discuss this with their European allies.
And what about the southern, the more southern American African countries, because they have a lot of this kind of coup stuff too. They have a lot of military stuff too. So I think the main problem the US has is that they are cherry picking, and they're cherry picking it way too easy for others to say, there is a personal gain for you personally. Like, you don't want to have a loss, you always want to have a gain as a country for yourself. And,
well, of course you have a self-interest.
and the thing is, why do you bother to invade states in the first place unless you have a personal gain as a state, if this is already something that you do by default? And so when then I see the US invading something like Syria or Iraq or something, they may say, yeah, humanitarian reasons, but they don't interact, or they don't go in other places, in other countries that may need it much more. But
you kind of cut out there for a second.
So there are countries that may actually need much more the how should I say, influence of the US to fix stuff up. But there are certain countries that you pick and certain countries that you don't pick. And I seriously doubt that, given that it is a state and that it is cherry picked, that there is not self-interest first and everything else as an excuse.
Well, I don't think I'm not talking I'm not talking about humanitarian stuff. I'm talking about stability only. That's kind of what I meant, is like there's no moral component to it. It's just, is this looking like it's going to head into a direction that could be a problem for us? Like that's what happened with ISIS when it caught us off guard. We had a problem with the power vacuum. We didn't step in fast enough, and now we got ISIS.
Yeah, but you made
Like
the
that's a
power vacuum
perfect
in the
example.
first place.
Well, I mean, sure, you're going to have this constant thing of time. I mean, you're not going to not deal with something that's still going on. I mean, what are you supposed to do about that? I mean, you can't, like, if you go to step in to sort of intervene in a destabilizing population, and then another one shows up because you're there, you can't not react to that. Well, of course, you're kind of correcting your own problem.
Yeah.
But it's not like they foresaw it and went, fuck it.
If I may propose a different way of thinking,
Okay.
I would propose the following: that unless it is actually because ISIS, I would not see the same way as I would see different things, because in ISIS, the case with ISIS was that you actually got hit yourself, right? The US got hit.
Yeah.
But the radicalism is in other countries too. You don't deal necessarily with the radicalism in other countries. You just deal with ISIS, even though ISIS is not your only problem. But that's a side note. So in ISIS's case, you can make a very good case for, we had to step in, get things into shape again. However, I would argue that unless it has a direct impact on you as a country, if you do not step in, it is not necessarily good to step in at any time, either way, because the same way North Korea is a threat to the US because they start to make nuclear weapons and everything, And the same way ISIS is a threat to the US. Unless there is an actual attack, unless there is an actual aggression, if you step in earlier, you will step in some cases, you will not step in others. And that is because there is, how should I say this? You have to be consistent. You have to have the same reasons to invade a country every time, ish. And if you're not consistent, then it's very easy for other people to come to you and say like, hey, there is a reason why you did this and there is a reason why you did that. If you happen to attack oil countries that did not start it, that were not the aggressor, it's very easy for other people to say, you went in for the oil. And they can very likely have a truth in that. There can be truth in that. Because it doesn't matter whether or not you have like this one oil place. If the next person in power will have power over the oil places that you basically conquered back, they maybe give you a better deal and you get cheaper oil. So it's not like you have to keep the oil places. Giving them back may even be advantageous. Hi, Siki. May even be advantageous for you because of the fact that it makes you look good and you still get your advantage off of it. So I think...
Well, I'm not saying no one benefits from it.
I think you have to have a consistent method, and you have to apply it evenly to every state, and it should be open to see. This is how we deal with people.
Yeah, and I'm far from the first person to defend every war the United States has ever been in. But modern conflict, I can't name, I don't think was justified in the name of stability. Now, are there going to be benefits to it and people that take advantage of that? Sure, but it's not like that's the reason that it's being done. So I completely disagree with that. I mean, ISIS, the reason I use ISIS is because the way they came out of, like, even so the FBI, even though it's supposed to sort of be more, in the federal level US, like they have reach around the globe. And we've been monitoring the groups that formed ISIS for literally decades. It's not like we just responded to it. You know what I mean? So that's all I was saying is I think most of the modern conflicts that we've been in are justifiable as far as stability reasons. Morally, that's a different question.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I can.
Okay.
Hi.
Hey, I guess I'd like to just step in a little bit. So my mic's okay?
Yeah, you're pretty loud actually.
Okay, just sounds different on my end a little bit. All right. I mean, I do have a political science degree, or what they call international studies. So I have studied, like foreign relations. So when it comes to like North Korea specifically, I've been watching YouTubers like Caspian Report. I don't know if you're aware of him.
No.
He has been making a YouTube channel just talking about international relations and the geopolitics behind it. And I think him and a few other YouTubers, and there's another guy named George Freeman, who's a think tank guy that works for Stratfor. And he's pretty much saying there's a high probability that the U.S. is actually going to be invading North Korea because of the different signs that's been kind of happening. And like the policy is really not like a Trump policy. It's really something that's probably been in the works since Bush. And now they just happen to be in the time frame because they reach a certain level on both sides. So I think it's kind of interesting.
I don't think North Korea is a Trump thing.
Oh yeah, I don't either.
I just think he's inflaming a problem by talking shit about the guy with the missiles.
Well, I bet if Trump knew actually that we might be having plans to invade North Korea, he probably wouldn't be running.
Yeah.
Because I bet he did not know until he got into office. And then it's in reality, when I was in the Air Force, what I've learned is it's pretty much the generals who write foreign policy.
Right.
They write. Some of them have PhDs in political science, and they're just writing up documents, figuring out strategies using mathematical equations and theories, and trying to predict the actions of other states. And pretty much right now, North Korea is in the way for the formation of an East Asian Union. So first thing that needs to go is North Korea and unify the Korean Peninsula. And then because the U.S. doesn't want China to establish East Asian Union first before Japan. So the policies that Japan had in the 1940s the Pan-Asian policies, that's hasn't really gone away. So the U.S. has taken that and it sees that as a way of consolidating states into super states, like the African Union, the European Union. It's a phenomenon that you see in geopolitics. So I just want to let you guys be aware of that.
Yeah, no, thank you for bringing that up. Some of that I wasn't aware of, but I think most of that makes sense to me
Yeah.
as just from a population level is what I'm used to looking at.
Hmm.
But specifically, I don't know. I mean, I'm not a game theory guy when it comes to that the sort of geopolitics, but to me, it just looking at the population of human behavior and the surrounding region.
Yeah, like in general,
I'm
states seek to expand.
yeah, I don't know. To me, it seems like the best way that it could possibly be handled would have to be somewhat of a land invasion because you would have to contain that country. I
Yeah.
mean, if it's waiting to be a problem for South Korea, who couldn't handle it on their own, in my opinion, and
Well,
China, who's just not going to deal with it.
yeah, I want to make it pretty clear, according to George Freeman, it's not North Korea making the threats. It's the US. And it started when they publicly announced that they're changing their policy on strategic patience. That is actual probably policy in
Huh.
a secret classified doctrine. The US is trying to taunt North Korea. It
Could you
wants
DM
North Korea
that
to
to me?
mess up. Because the US wants to
Could you
stay
DM that
like
to
the
me on
good guy.
Twitter? I'd check it out.
Yeah, George Freeman, yeah, he's a really fascinating guy. He really understands how war works and politics and the changing of borders, and that's pretty much the goal of the U.S. is probably to get rid of North Korea and unify the peninsula and fix up the problem left behind in the 1950s. And it just happened
Yeah,
to be the time when our missile defense capabilities have reached a certain level and North Korea's has reached a certain level, and I think they're preparing to act. Because you don't send 3 aircraft carriers, or maybe even 4 actually now, and don't use them.
right. Yeah, that's kind of if you're putting that kind of power in that region, you're like willing to give that up in other regions. Like
Yeah. I
something's
bet
up.
those
You
aircraft carriers
consider
are
it
filled with
worth it.
tanks.
Yeah, I
So
could
like
agree with that.
when it comes to like military buildup, what I've learned when I was in the Air Force, I'm no longer in the Air Force, so I can talk about it. I didn't have anything classified. I was just as a second lieutenant, then I got out. But I've learned that when it comes to like military buildup, they do it over a long period of time, so states can't see that you're building up. So they will slowly transfer tanks, Abrams tanks, to Misawa Air Force Base in Japan over a 5-year period.
Right.
That's part of their plan, and they'll upgrade things, but they're not going to like send them all at once. So like
Yeah.
those aircraft carriers may have had a few tanks in them for probably over a year at least. So it's kind of
Yeah.
interesting when you actually learn about strategic moves by the military.
It's really similar to here. Well, here's full circle to Jordan Peterson. um, when he talks about, and this isn't just a psychological phenomenon. It's a so you can explain it on more like technical in-depth levels, but
Hmm.
the simple way to describe it is from person to person, and this is what Jordan Peterson talks about, is if you want to kind of like isolate or control someone, you push them the direction you want to, and then you wait till they object and you stop.
Hmm.
Then you do it some more after you've waited a while, and then they object and you stop and you just wait and you keep doing that, just a slow build up. And pretty soon they're way far away from where they thought they would be by objecting.
Yeah. Yeah, it
So
seems pretty
yeah,
psychological. Like,
it's interesting how things scale up like that.
what do you guys think about the incident over Hawaii? Because to me, that was a fishy incident that happened with the missile scare. I don't think
I
that was
haven't
an accident.
I know into it enough to be like feel comfortable saying
Hmm.
anything about it really.
One of my friends was in Hawaii and he said, okay, this was strange because I heard the sirens at the base, but they didn't turn the sirens on outside the base. And then prior to that, a month ago, they actually tested the nuclear sirens for the first time since 1993, I think it was. So I feel like this is like strategically being planned by those in charge. And the guy who actually pressed the so-called button, I bet he was sent some kind of order, probably from the Navy, and he probably thought it was real. And that's what I think they said one statement. He was saying like, I really thought it was real, and then the Navy pretty much got him fired. I think it was some psychological test, because they have to test the GIS softwares to analyze human behavior, see if all the text messages were sent out, how many people actually received it, which locations. And I bet it was pretty strategic.
I don't, I guess I'll say this. I'm aware of what sites there are at Hawaii that are
Mm.
non-military but part of the U.S. government.
Mm.
And I could see why, or at least it being possible, that this could have been sort of a way to go through something without provoking another nation state to attack us. I guess I'll just stop there.
Mm. Yeah, I don't know. It's it's hard to prove this stuff because the powers that be are the ones in control. Which is
not
strange
going
that it happened in Japan too.
I'm
But
not
it was
going to
just for a
say,
minute.
yeah, I'm not willing to say that that's what's going on. I'm saying I wouldn't put it past something like, hey, we need to make sure the system we haven't used in forever still works,
Yeah.
but we don't want to we don't want to light a fire under certain countries' ass.
Yeah.
So we'll just say it was a mistake. I'm not going to say that's true, but I could see it being a good reason.
What's strange is when I was looking at some of the videos online and they had the screen bar showed on the TVs, is I bet they have the option to actually blank out the whole TV and put the message on, but they didn't do that. They showed the basketball game that a YouTuber posted a video of the incident. So I thought that was kind of strange because I know in other cases, like in Texas, something like that happened and they blanked out the whole screen. So I don't know if they have the control over that. So was that intentional not to blank out the whole TV screen and show the message? So something like that, little details like that you have to look into, but it's hard to say.
And also, you have to think, we are always talking about humans. When you are in a situation where things are not quite straightforward and booked, people tend to mess up and make mistakes, and people tend to focus on certain things and not on others. So there's always that thing to add into the equation. But we completely went off topic, guys. Just saying. And you had fun. I'm happy for you. And I just want to say something, just so to keep everyone, like, we all know that the US doesn't start wars. The UFOs do, right? Do we agree on that? Do we at least agree on that?
Did you guys see Mouthy Buddha's video?
I have to say, and I have to confess, I have a very hard time to watch anyone's video. I have hardly time to watch Logic's video, which is horrible. Don't tell him. Don't tell him. Do not tell him.
Was he on a hangout with Mouthy Buddha? Because I think he was. Or no, with some black guy, I think he was.
No, he was with some black guy on the Drunken Peasants.
You fooled me for half a second. I was like, oh, Derek. I was like, whoa, wait, what?
Yeah, Derek, that's my man. I assume all you guys know who he was.
Took me a second.
Yeah,
I still gotta finish up that stream.
Yeah, no, I gotta stop the stream because it's already 4, and I completely messed up at the beginning. No, you guys, you know what? I let the hangout open. You can chat in the hangout. I'll just have to stop the stream.
Sure.
The stream, because that works on a weird program of mine here. A one button program so that I can stop and start streaming whenever I want to. I love it. It's like having like the nuclear button just for streams. But yeah, you can just continue talking in Hangout.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean,
okay, guys, chat. Is there anything you still want to add? Is there anything you want us to add to the conversation? Or are you all fine with it? Chat is super. Like, they had this huge discussions before about this whole polyglot thing, and now they're like all silent. Everyone's gone. I think the problem is Siki popped in, and everyone was waiting for him to explain to us aliens, and then he started talking about politics, and he actually sounds like a very smart person when he talks about politics, and then everyone was like, wait a second, that's not Siki, he's fake, he's not a Siki, give us Siki back. And by the way, Siki, whether you like it or not, I will still make part 3, even though you don't end up at first place.
Okay. You want to go right ahead.
Okay, so Psycho wants to talk to...
I took my channel down, actually, the commentary one.
Why do you always do that, G?
I was just kind of testing that. I just don't have time. It's like,
Yeah, but
it
like
takes
you
a
have
lot
to
of
think
time to do
about the
commentary
following. If you
videos.
make a channel and you have a couple of people that are following you or subscribing to you, leave it the hell on. Eventually, you may have time for it, and if not, at least you have a
Yeah.
second channel in case your first channel goes down.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
I
yeah.
just thought maybe I should just focus on my main channel and try to
Yeah.
just talk about other topics. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's
But
good.
there's so many other YouTubers out there who do a really good job on politics, especially like YouTuber Caspian Report and George Freeman on Stratfor. There are a lot more professionals out there.
I have to say, politics is something where I zone out.
That's it's something I like, but I totally get how people are just kind of man, they tune out.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know,
Well, I mean,
the
it's
moment.
a science in itself, sort of political science. I mean, you gotta have a degree to really understand it, and I tried. And there's a lot of theory and doctrines on it. It's just like it's in depth. Even math. I'm like, I didn't like the math when I was studying about political science at the University of Iowa. I'm like, oh my gosh, we have to learn math and politics, game theory and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So Psycho, if you're not on Twitter, then DM me on YouTube, and I'll set up a hangout where you can talk with Shifty, and then
Oh,
we
there
will
you
have
go.
settled that too. Yeah, you can fight it out. I will make a corner for Shifty. I will make a corner for Psycho. You know, you can go at
That's cool.
it full on and moderate. I will stand next there. Okay, this guy got a punch. That guy got a punch. Very fun.
Okay.
Yeah, and I guess I seriously have to go. No one else having to say anything. That's why I said some point I'm only on Discord. Dude, I have a Discord. You can still. You're on YouTube, Psycho. You are on YouTube. I see that you're on YouTube. You know, you have an account on YouTube. There is nothing stopping you from sending me a DM through YouTube on my YouTube and setting up a time and whatever.
You want to hear something really funny? I didn't know you could do that. Shows you how invested I am in understanding YouTube.
I have to say,
There's
they do their
DMing on
best.
YouTube.
There is DMing on YouTube. They do their best to hide it. They seriously do their best to hide all kinds of stuff that they have. And yeah, no, anyway, I have to stop. I have to go. See y'all. And thank you very much for listening in.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, guys. Psycho, I subbed to you, so sub back.
Okay, now, wait, guys, wait, we're still live. I have to find the stupid button to turn it off first.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I thought you were in agreement. You streamed, Psycho, you almost streamed with Carrie and I think we started talking about that and it just didn't happen.
Just give me a sec. Stop.